Hello and welcome to the Week 15 NFL Slate Breakdown. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Denny Carter at CD Carter 13. Of course, this week we had a Thursday game, a Saturday game. We're recording this on Saturday, so we're going to skip over that. You have to have it be a certain kind of degenerate to be finding yourself slates that start on Saturday with that game, and not a bad game necessarily, but not one that I'm going out of my way to target, even in season long. So aside from where I'm forced to. So we're going to start on the Sunday. And first one up, the Chiefs against the Ravens. And Chiefs early this season, it's kind of been this one of the storylines in the NFL now. I mean, early this season, they looked awful. It was a team we picked on every week. The secondary was terrible. And the Ravens, at least they've been consistently bad all season, especially on the defensive end. And now, I mean, they're running out multiple quarterbacks that weren't even on rosters for part of this season. So this one, the way the Chiefs defense is playing, their offense has been playing well. I mean, Vegas tends to agree this one might end up being an easy win for the Chiefs again.
Yeah, I mean, how often do you see a team favored by 8 points? And that's what we have here with the Chiefs. I love the stack of using Kansas City's defense, which has scored double-digit fantasy points in 4 of its past 5 games, along with a Charkandrick West, but Spencer Ware is questionable. So, that really, his health, Ware's health it hinges entirely on whether I use West or not. I don't know. I can't commit to using West until I hear that Ware is not going to play. So I do like that stack if we hear before the game that Spencer Ware is not going to play.
Yeah, I'm with you there. That's going to change a lot because we've seen Spencer Ware steal many red zone targets and looks and goal line touches from Charkandrick West, and hopefully we'll get some clarity on whether or not he's going to play or not play for sure beforehand, so we can at least decide if we want to get West out of some lineups. But on the Ravens side, really not a whole lot to see here, as we know. I mean, everyone seemingly on the IR, everyone back at home resting. So pretty much Kamar Aiken's been the only guy who's been somewhat relevant recently, aside from Buck Allen. He's had that big game a couple weeks ago. So are you using either one of these guys? I know you got a lot of Chiefs defense. I know we all do.
Yeah, well, I actually think the Buck Allen and the Chiefs defense can do well in the same game. And I mean, I think Buck Allen could catch 6 or 7 or 8 passes here. So I'm more interested in Buck Allen in DraftKings than I am on FanDuel. But so I'm not entirely avoiding him, but I just wanted to jump back real quick and mention that Alex Smith is in a lot of my cash games this week. He's very cheap. Only the Saints allow more quarterback fantasy points when you adjust for strength of schedule than the Ravens. So I think Alex Smith makes for a really solid high floor play.
Yeah, seeing some talk about him on Twitter as well, and he's had a couple big games, and he's made some plays with his legs too, and those are the plays you really want from a DFS standpoint. Just one 30-yard run is fine with me. You get your 3 points off that. I mean, that's a 75-yard pass right there. I'll take that all day.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Next up, the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Atlanta Falcons, and 8 weeks ago, you look at this one and you'd say, well, hopefully the Jags can slow down the Falcons, and now it's kind of flipped, and we say, hopefully the Falcons can slow down the Jags, because the Jags, one of those teams that seemingly, we talked about a bunch of weeks how they just always seem to have a team total of 21 and a half, something like that. And now finally getting some respect from Vegas, and part of that due to the fact that the Falcons are just an absolute mess right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, stacking a lot of Jaguars this week, including Denard Robinson, who will have very heavy ownership this week. And in the Thursday games that kicked off the other day, he does have really high ownership. I think it was something in the range of 30% or so on FanDuel. So, if you're using him, you're not alone. But I really do think that he's a solid play. The Falcons are supposed to be without their starting middle linebacker. That front seven is already not very good.
Yeah.
And as a longtime Denard Robinson truther, I'm very excited about this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and when he's been on the field, he's looked good. I mean, So I'm with you there. I have some exposure there myself. So outside of that, I mean, I guess we'll go to the Falcons side. You mentioned Julio Jones here a little bit, and really his issues, I'm not going to completely shoulder the blame on Matt Ryan, but Matt Ryan has not been good at all. So Julio, how much Julio are you going to have?
I actually have a lot of Julio because, with Odell Beckham going against Josh Norman, I mean, we'll talk about that later and how that might not be what it seems. But with that and with Antonio Brown going against Denver, I just see Julio as the clear-cut, top-end receiver option who has a really exploitable matchup in a game that you have to believe is going to be high scoring, right? I mean, neither of these defenses are very good, and as bad as the Falcons are, they used to score points, so there's some hope there. I do like Julio a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said with the high score, 49-point total, one of the higher ones on the week. So definitely plenty of playmakers on both sides, and no one I would think would be surprised to see this be the highest scoring game of the week. So I definitely like the Julio call there. I haven't lost faith in him. I just feel like the issue a lot of times has been targets. I mean, he just hasn't been there. But in this game, you imagine they're going to need to score to keep up, and that's the kind of game we want Julio in for sure.
Yeah, and I like throwing Julio and Allen Robinson in the same lineup. I think both could pretty easily go off here.
Yeah, the recency bias things with Allen Robinson now 2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks ago had the huge game with the 3 touchdowns, and last week did have a touchdown, but it was 4 yards and it was his only catch. So huge ownership to low ownership. Now all of a sudden you get a guy who's still scoring touchdowns one way or another. So I'm with you there. I like that call. Next up, the most interesting game of the week, if you ask me, Giants and Panthers, the one everyone's talking about, of course, with Odell Beckham versus Josh Norman, or is it versus the Panthers defense? 48-point total. Panthers. We know the Giants are notorious streak killers. They're the team that wants to ruin everyone's perfect season. They've done it a couple times before. So first off, I got to ask, what do you think the chances are that the Giants pull it off here? And then tell me about Odell Beckham.
It kind of shapes up. They're at home. And I think that they can use. I mean, look at OBJ is basically their only offensive weapon, right? Yep. And so I know it's dangerous to assume that coaches will do the smart thing or the thing that we think is smart, right? But I mentioned that OBJ runs 25% of his routes from the slot, and Josh Norman this week said he just shrugged his shoulders. He said, "Look, if they put him in the slot, I'm not going to be on him." He said, I play the side, I play one side, or I play on the outside. We have a guy who covers, we have another guy who, by the way, is their main slot cover guy is out. So they have a backup in that role right now. Beckham was running, as recently as like week 7 or 8, he was running like 35% of his routes from the slot. So the Giants have shown a willingness to move him around and get him into favorable matchups. Why the Falcons didn't do this with Julio Jones last week is beyond me. To keep him away from Josh Norman. But I think that OBJ is not only an okay cash game play, a little scary, but okay. I think that he's fantastic GPP play because I think that his ceiling is still very, very, very high if he's used in a certain way. So I have a lot of exposure to him in GPPs.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe that sort of thinking is exactly why Tom Coughlin has won Super Bowls and the Atlanta Falcons have not won Super Bowls, because you make the adjustments that help you win the game, especially tough matchups like this one. So, I like that. And it's hard for me, regardless of the matchup, to fade a guy that's just been such a high-volume play and such a consistently good option. And, I mean, that upside is enormous. I mean, we're talking season-long leagues. I have a weird season-long league where you get first down, bonus points for first downs, bonus points for 20-plus yard receptions, and Odell Beckham is just an absolute monster. And, I mean, he scored almost 60 points last week in that league. So, I mean,
wow.
he can do everything. And, I mean, that league's stupid. Don't play a league like that. But either way, his ceiling is just enormous. And
I do want to say real quick, yeah. I see a lot of chatter on Twitter about in season-long leagues, you got to bench OBJ. Stop. You're not benching. Stop it. He's going to see 12 targets. Yeah. He could go bananas. He could have a decent game. You're not benching him.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because what could you possibly have that would be better? I mean, unless you just have a ridiculous amount of depth. But if you do, I mean, it's the whole old saying where they say you play what got you here. You don't just get to the playoffs and then, the Giants aren't going to stop playing Odell Beckham when they get to if they get to the playoffs, I should say. But, I mean, it doesn't make sense. You still play your best players. So, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
On the Panthers side, obviously Cam Newton, no analysis necessary. He just does what he does every single week. You just wonder how many kids are going to get free footballs this week. But outside of that, Greg Olsen. But are you messing with this running back situation at all for Carolina?
I'm not in cash lineups for sure. I'm not even really excited about them in tournament lineups. But it seems like Fozzie Whitaker will get first crack at the majority of Jonathan Stewart's carries. They seem to like him, trust him. But Mike Tolbert, the human bowling ball, looms, I think, in that situation as a guy who could vulture, some short carries, maybe some goal line carries. And for good reason. I mean, he's really hard to stop once he starts going downhill. So, I really think that Whitaker's, even if he gets, 15, 18 carries here, I think that, his floor might be okay, but I'm not thrilled about him overall.
Yeah, like you said, Mike Tolbert could end up being the most cursed man on Sunday on Twitter because for Cam Newton, for anyone who takes the Fozzie Whitaker route, I mean, he could certainly take those touchdowns. He's done that many, many times, like you said. So I'm mostly staying away. Also, very few shares for me.
And about Cam, no team has allowed more passing yardage than the Giants this year. I thought that was something to point out.
Yeah, and nobody has slowed down Cam Newton anytime recently either. So, yeah, I hate to pay up for quarterbacks usually in cash games, but if you just want to go ahead and lock in some easy points, Cam, once again, is just your guy. Speaking of a guy who's usually that guy, Tom Brady, Patriots against the Titans, 46.5-point total, but it's the Patriots getting most of. It's hard to see this game staying close. It's a 2-touchdown spread. Obviously, Danny Amendola is ridiculously cheap, like you mentioned, especially on DraftKings. You've got Rob Gronkowski is back. Maybe he's not completely 100%, but he's back. Looked fine last week. Looks like we're going to be without Edelman for one more week, but you don't anticipate that the Patriots are going to need that. And you and I were discussing for a minute before the show about the James White situation, and obviously with Garrett Blount done, I mean, everyone just keeps falling, and as they always do, the Patriots just put new guys in every role. So, what do you do here?
Okay, so first of all, this is a classic example of trying not to be afraid of a team's success. The Patriots are projected; their implied total is 30.25 points. It's a ton. They're 2-touchdown favorites against the Titans. In talking, on Twitter about this column and what I wrote, people are saying, mostly I'm fading Patriots because I don't know how this game script is going to go. And it's true. I mean, it could go sideways pretty early, right?
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that Tom Brady and Amendola and Gronk and other staples at offense are going to have some say in how they score 30 points here, right? So I'm not thinking along those lines. I'm not trying to guess how game script might go haywire. Brady is a super, super safe option who, I think he still has tremendous ceiling here, and so, he might be a good tournament play if you're not into him for cash purposes. And I mentioned that the Titans secondary is attacked primarily through the slot receiver, whereas the outside receivers don't get a lot of attention, and especially with the Patriots because they don't really have outside receivers. But the slot guy. So we saw Eric Decker last week have a really nice game again from the slot. Brandon Cooks had 4 catches for 72 yards and a touchdown against the Titans. And Nate Washington, he had 4 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown against these Titans. So Amendola is basically in all of my cash lineups on DraftKings.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And that's a good point there about the don't be afraid of success, because if you don't look at the point spread, you just look and see highest team total, as the Patriots are most weeks, really. It makes sense that why would you be afraid to get yourself parts of the 30 points. And, we'll probably get much lower ownership than we rightfully should for a team in this matchup, because we have seen the Titans at times, put up points with Mariota. I mean, catches touchdowns now. The guy can do everything. So certainly, if he starts putting up points, like you said, with the ceiling with all these guys, it could be pretty massive still.
Sure, and I like Delaney Walker. I'm not afraid of Delaney Walker here in cash. No one is a more integral part of their offense from the tight end spot than Walker, besides obviously Rob Gronkowski. I talked about his win-loss splits. They're pretty even. So even if you think they're going to lose by a ton here, I think Delaney Walker is a pretty solid play.
Yeah, especially if they're playing from behind, maybe even some more looks for him there.
He could see a ton of target. Kendall Wright's supposed to be out. They're going to throw a lot. They're going to have to throw a lot. So he could see a ton of looks.
Yeah, I like that call a lot. Next up, Washington and Buffalo. 44-point total here. Bills slight favorites. And this is a situation where, once again, the narrative kind of let us down. LaShawn McCoy wasn't terrible in his return to Philly. But he had a little bit over 100 yards, no touchdowns. So that's kind of been his Achilles heel, I guess it is. But this is one that I don't really have a lot of Washington, but we have seen Kirk Cousins at times play well. I think Jordan Reed's the guy that I really have more than anyone else on the Washington side. How about you?
Yeah, I have a bit of Reed. Mostly I've gone Delaney as if I'm paying up for tight end. But, McCoy's matchup is really solid here. Washington ranks 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to enemy running backs. And only 6 teams have given up more rushing yardage than Washington this year. So we all know that if this Bills offense can run it, they will. And, the ideal situation is not for Tyrod Taylor to throw 35 or 40 times like he did against Philadelphia. That's actually not even good for his fantasy value. That's not how he succeeded this year. So I actually do have exposure to McCoy, even after last week's, a pretty disappointing performance overall.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, like you said, you've been saying it all year. Tyrod Taylor is the guy. He's your cash game guy. He gets you your, 14 to 16 fantasy points or whatever you're looking for his price tag. Maybe a little bit more with some touchdowns, and that's about it. Like you said, you don't want this guy throwing a ton. I mean, when they're successful in the running game, that's when he doesn't have to take chances down the field. Other than a couple to Sammy Watkins, I wouldn't mind seeing a couple of those though.
Yeah, no, me neither.
Yeah. Next up, we got the Vikings and the Bears. Another fairly low total. Bears total really low, only 18.5 implied points for them. So we've got Jay Cutler, who's played fairly well. Alshon Jeffrey, Zach Miller, both guys were listed as questionable. It doesn't seem like either are actually concerned to not play in this one. So Adrian Peterson against the team that used to have an Adrian Peterson. I don't know if you remember those days a couple of years ago. The auction drafts, you nominate the wrong Adrian Peterson intentionally. But this one, it's just not particularly appealing to me on either side. I don't have a lot of either one of these teams.
Yeah, me neither. Vikings games are hard because they play slow on offense. They're pretty solid defensively at home, although they're still nicked up, in the secondary, and that's why I think that I wouldn't quibble with anyone who just slots in Alshon Jeffrey into their cash games this week. He's going to see a lot of coverage from Xavier Rhodes, who I'm not saying that he's a total debacle for the rest of his career, but he has definitely struggled this year. We've talked on the show about targeting him basically, and he covers most number one receivers. So Alshon is seeing. I mentioned in the Slate breakdown, he's seeing an enormous percentage of Jay Cutler's throws come his way. So that's the one guy I'm interested in here mostly.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's him in the passing game, and then you take a big step down, and it's kind of just Zach Miller, both the running backs. I mean, he's really the only actual wide receiver that gets any sort of volume in his attack, like you said. So, yeah. And he does have huge upside. I mean, Jay Cutler, it gives him not quite Odell Beckham type volume, but one of the better volume plays still anywhere. So I'm on board there.
And the Bears' 18-point total does scare me a bit, so I don't have any Cutler. I'm not big on Forte this week, but I think that you can get Alshon in and expect a good return.
Yeah, I like that. Next up, Seahawks and the Browns. Whether it was an invented narrative or not, Mike Pettin over here talking about Russell Wilson not being an elite quarterback, obviously coming back. I don't know if he backtracked necessarily, but saying that wasn't what he was saying, blah, 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 turning into a joke. Either way, it's not like the Seahawks aren't motivated. They're playing like the most motivated team in all of football, if you ask me. Russell Wilson's been locked in. Another narrative since they said he was a celebrity quarterback and all this and blah, blah. None of that matters. We knew Russell Wilson was good. He just struggled for a couple weeks, and now all of a sudden the Seahawks are the team you don't want to play, and the Browns are kind of always the team you do want to play.
Yeah, and the rushing we talked before the show, the rushing prowess of the Seahawks hasn't been great, but they're playing against the Browns, who have just been gashed on the ground all year and through the air, to be fair, but on the ground all year. And so I was bemoaning the fact that there is no Bryce Brown on DraftKings this week. Was really hoping to put him in basically all GPPs because of reports that I've read out of Seattle. But besides that, I mentioned Travis Benjamin in this game, and I think that he's as good a wide receiver dart throw in a GPP as anyone. In games in which Manziel has started, he's seen 10 targets per contest, and according to Pro Football Focus's matchup chart, he has the 7th best wide receiver cornerback matchup of the week. He should avoid Richard Sherman, who actually hasn't been fantastic from a numbers standpoint this year. So I'm kind of excited to see if Travis Benjamin can hit a long one. We've seen him do that before with Manziel, and he's like I said, 10 targets, and the Browns are going to throw 40 times for sure.
Oh, yeah. And, Vegas says that, you might as well just start down a couple points if you're the Browns because they're just going to be down. And, like you said, they've had some success down the field in that Manziel and Travis Benjamin duo. So I like that. And then if you're looking for the chalk plays, they're pretty much all on the Seattle side. You got Doug Baldwin. You've got, of course, Russell Wilson. Both those guys really popular as well. So if we're talking cash games, of course, all these guys in play. Tyler Lockett's another guy who a lot of people have shown some love to. So cash game wise, of course, you're playing these guys. GPPs, are the ownership levels high enough that you're considering not playing much of these guys, or is it still you want to get a piece of this because they're just so consistently good right now?
I missed out on Russell Wilson last week, so I hesitate to say. To say that I'm going to do the same this week, but he will have a ton of ownership this week. I actually think that, considering the price, he'll have a lot more ownership than Tom Brady and Cam Newton, who have, I would say, as high or higher ceilings than Russell Wilson in this game. Although, Wilson is just a cash game lock and load here. I mentioned how putrid the Cleveland secondary has been, and how good Wilson has been since Jimmy Graham went down, which I don't think is a coincidence, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, I do. I like Wilson a lot in cash, but you expect huge ownership, I think, from people looking at that stat line from the past 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, he's been absolutely tremendous, and like you said, the whole Jimmy Graham goes down, and it's almost now Thomas Rawls out, and you mentioned with the running game, it's almost like he's forced to throw the ball down the field, and he's thriving at a ridiculous rate with doing that. So it's the Browns. The weird thing about the Browns is it's maybe even better for them that Joe Hayden's out, because Joe Hayden throughout his career obviously been a very good corner, but he's been awful this year. So you see him put on IR, and everyone's saying, "Oh my God, look at the Browns losing Joe Hayden." Joe Hayden wasn't there this year anyway. He was awful.
Yeah, and Russell Wilson is averaging over his past, I think, 3 games, 0.9 fantasy points per drop back, which is just an insane number.
Yeah, that's crazy. So definitely, I'll still have myself some pieces, but like you said, he's easily going to be the highest owned quarterback this week. So just keep that in mind. You're not fooling anyone. You're not sneaking up on anybody by putting Russell Wilson in any lineup ever. But cash games, I would be very wary of fading he and Doug Baldwin, though, for sure.
Yeah.
San Diego Chargers and the Miami Dolphins next up. 2 teams that have both been huge disappointments this year. Not necessarily from a DFS perspective, more roller coaster like in that way. But in real life, both teams have been awful. The fan bases can't be too happy about that, especially at the San Diego. Maybe they're saying maybe San Diego going to be gone. Maybe it's their last game. Seeing Malcolm Floyd they're talking about how there's a narrative with him and maybe he doesn't play anymore after this, and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't really care too much about narratives for bad teams because neither one of these teams is relevant. Neither one of them has actually been really consistently good at all from a DFS standpoint. So Lamar Miller is the guy that drives me absolutely nuts, not because of him, but when he gets touches, all year when he gets touches, he's been productive. But is he going to get touches? That's the big question for me here.
I felt a lot better about him when the Dolphins made their coaching change and Miller was given a larger share of the passing game action out of the backfield. That's gone. I mean, he didn't see one target last week. He saw 12 carries, went for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I am, there is some hesitation, but this matchup is so juicy. It's just unbelievable. I talked about how bad the Chargers' run defense has been. We've talked about them all year as a team to target with running backs. So I said in the Slate breakdown, I'm not opposed to playing Miller in cash lineups because I think that his price is really reasonable, and B, the matchup is just too good. I don't think that he needs 20 carries here to be good. I think that he can get 15 touches and put up really nice numbers. So I guess I'm probably on that island alone or close to alone, but I kind of like Miller here.
No, I'm on that island with you. I'm just on the island where it's you're happy once you get your, say something like last week, the 12 for 89 and a couple scores. You're thrilled with that, of course, but then you think, what if he got 18 touches? So frustrating, yes, but I'm with you. I think he does have a really nice floor. And then, of course, we've seen people predict Melvin Gordon touchdowns about 1,000 times this year. Everyone wants to be the person that's getting the Melvin Gordon touchdowns when they're coming, if they're coming. Melvin Gordon, I mean, I've dropped the guy in season-long leagues, even PPR leagues. Not that he's been terrible, but there's been better options. Are you playing anyone from the Chargers side? Maybe Antonio Gates?
So I made a case for why Phillip Rivers might not be a terrible play here. Part of it has to do with how bad the Dolphins' defense has been. And the thing with Rivers is that as his offensive line has collapsed, his production has collapsed because he simply does not have time to drop back, survey a defense, and make a throw. Forget the fact that his wide receiver crew has been decimated by injuries. But the Dolphins are 22nd in sacks this year, so they're not really putting pressure on anyone. And I think that that the Rivers might have some time to operate here. The Chargers' total is not hateful, and we have to remember that Miami allowed 308 yards and a touchdown to Matt Schaub. So, I think that Rivers can exceed that, obviously.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that might be the most disappointing one individual thing for any team in the league is the Miami Dolphins pass rush. I mean, coming into this year, that was everyone saying, look at this Miami defensive line. This is going to be the one that dominates opposing quarterbacks, and they have been a huge disappointment. So an expensive disappointment also.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you talk about Malcolm Floyd. I know this is narrative apocalypse, but I really do think with the ball has to go somewhere, right? And they can't all go to Antonio Gates and all sorts of injuries. We saw Floyd get I think 9 targets last week. So hey, with a big deep threat like that, it only takes one. So he doesn't need 15 targets. He could get 5 targets, catch a long one, and you have a great GPP play.
Yeah, and I mean he's priced like a good upside GPP play with plenty of downside as well. So I mean he's not a high risk guy at his price either. So
yeah, very volatile, which is what we're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on next to a 47-point total with the Raiders and the Packers. Packers small favorites in this one, and another one of those teams that I'm not going to go say the Packers are a disappointment yet, but they're not the offensive juggernaut that we thought they would be. Obviously, losing Jordy Nelson was a big hit, but finally, Eddie Lacy looking like the old Eddie Lacy, or at least 3 of the last 4 weeks. We can go ahead and skip that one game out of memory with the 1 yard. But aside from that, it's a balanced offense, which is strange to think from a Packers standpoint because we're used to seeing Aaron Rodgers just simply dominate people through the air. So big total, though, in this one. Eddie Lacy, he's kind of been not talked about much this week, but he's been really good over the past, aside from that one game.
Yeah, so if you take out the game in which he was benched for violating curfew against the Lions. If you just take the two games on either side of that game, he has racked up 41 carries for 229 yards on the ground, and he's got 5 of 8 targets for 58 yards. So, if you eliminate that game, I think that you see an uptick in usage, an uptick in production and efficiency, and Mike McCarthy calling plays. From everything that I read from the Packers beat reporters, say that he is the key to getting Lacy involved. Like, he wants Lacy involved. And so against a Raiders team that has been blown up on the ground a few times this year, I really do think Lacy has a lot of upside here.
Yeah, I like that. Over under 4.5 sacks for Khalil Mack.
I'm thinking they're gonna just throw the house at him instead of just letting him go 1-on-1 like he did against the Broncos.
God. I mean, I felt bad for Brock Osweiler after a while. I mean, that was brutal. That was,
man, it really was. Oh, gosh.
That was shades of Reggie White. I mean, that was crazy good.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive linemen. I know you hear this phrase, they would look like they're on skates, but they actually looked like they were on skates. They would go straight backwards.
Yeah, or they walked out to go ice skating and forgot their skates and just
slipped. Yeah,
it was brutal. Real quick on the Raiders side, you mentioned Lat Murray, a guy that's his price has dropped. Certainly not a cash game option still. As far as receivers, they're going to need to score points, of course. Crabtree, Cooper, are you interested in either one of these guys?
Again, Cooper is supposed to see the much worse matchup as far as who's covering him. Sam Shields is supposed to be on him for most of this game. His production, Cooper's production in bad matchups has been less than great. So, if I have to choose one, I'm going with Crab. I feel like a broken record, but if I have to choose one, I'm going with Crabtree, just because I think the ball will have to go somewhere, and I think that the Raiders are going to have to throw it a lot in this game. I don't see this as a game where they're going to be able to have a balanced attack. I mentioned Derek Carr's splits in wins and losses, and it's nuts. So in wins, he averages 28.3 fantasy points, and in losses, he averages 17.1. So we have an 11-point split there. So if you think they're going to lose, I don't think you can use Derek Carr.
Yeah, and I do think they're going to lose. So Derek Carr, get off my rosters. No thanks. Next up, probably the biggest game from a playoff standpoint this week. Steelers and Broncos. Obviously, Broncos battling for I won't say home field necessarily, because it doesn't seem to me that the Patriots are going to lose enough games for that to happen necessarily. But either way, fighting for a bye. Bengals, Patriots, Broncos, all those. Steelers on the outside looking in, but they're the team that nobody wants to play right now. I see people on Twitter, Patriots fans saying, even talking about they're not sure whether they'd rather have home field advantage or be able to avoid the Steelers on their side. So this is a Denver defense that's still great, an offense, though, that is just historically bad right now. So not a lot of pieces that people are going to have a lot in GPPs. So I'm looking at Antonio Brown and company.
Yes. And last I saw, Brown had 2% ownership on FanDuel. So
it's insane.
Yeah. And I think, from what I was reading this week, it seems that they're intent on getting him away from Talib and getting him into favorable spots. And, even if you just don't, can't stomach running up a receiver against the Denver secondary, and I get that, just look at the Steelers total. I mean, it actually ticked up to 26 points right now. So, somebody in Vegas thinks that they are going to score quite a bit. Yep. And, if they do, I believe Brown's going to be involved. I think the Steelers overall make for really good tournament plays because they're just going to be faded everywhere. I'm not using Roethlisberger in cash games just because of his price, and I'm afraid of his floor a little bit. But yeah, Brown, D'Angelo Williams, I think is another option, and Heath Miller, who I think will continue the trend we've seen against Denver, which is we can't attack on the outside, so we have to attack down the middle, and that means that Heath Miller could have one of his plotting dad running 7 catch for 70 yard type games, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and we've seen that from the Steelers a lot this year when they face good defenses. A lot of short passes to Heath Miller. We saw against the Bengals twice. He's had huge games. Huge as far as volume. I mean, never going to be a huge yardage guy, but, getting a lot of looks, certainly. Next up, 49ers and the Bengals, and obviously A.J. McCarron under center with Andy Dalton hurt. You got Tyler Eifert already out for this one. George Iloka's out as well. Obviously, I'm biased on this one. I'm a Bengals fan. I still this defense is good enough that there should be no issue with winning this game. And I'm not going out of my way to play A.J. McCarron, but I am a big fan of both Jeremy Hill and A.J. Green in this one.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, just as someone who watches a lot of Bengals, A.J. Green's production with McCarron under center last week seemed to suggest that McCarron knows where his bread is buttered. Is that something that you think will continue?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, it seemed to me last week. I mean, you saw early, or you've seen with the Steelers over the years. I mean, they haven't had a corner that could cover AJ Green anyway. So the Bengals know that, which is why he gets so many looks. But I mean, 49ers don't have an individual corner that's going to cover AJ Green either. So I mean, you see Hugh Jackson saying the offense isn't going to change. It's still going to be the offense. It's going to be a different guy throwing the football, and everyone kind of not believing him. But I tend to believe the fact that they're still going to throw the ball down the field and take chances, and especially with Tyler Eifert out. I mean, I think we see a lot of short passes in the running game, and I don't see why you wouldn't continue to attack A.J. Green down the field, because why not utilize your best weapon? And I think they will.
Right, and you mentioned Jeremy Hill. The rushing totals against the 49ers over the past 6 games are 180, 15, which was the Falcons, 220, 64, 160, and 215. So we have 4 huge totals in that span. And so it shows that, when game script goes right for the 49ers opponent, they can really hammer away with that running game. And I guess that suggests that Jeremy Hill could finally prove, worthy of something this week. He also sees the vast majority of carries inside the 5-yard line for the Bengals.
Yeah, and I mean, like we saw last week, Isaiah Crowell, similar size runner to Jeremy Hill, a big bruising type of back. And when the Bengals have needed to rely on someone in the running game, it's been Jeremy Hill. So I have probably more Jeremy Hill than I would like to admit this week, but I'm a big fan.
Yeah, is Burfict playing this week?
I believe he is. I haven't. Okay. The only people I saw that were out were Iloka and Eifert. So okay. I think he's questionable, but I think he should be good.
Yeah, I mentioned that as far as Sean Drone's value here, just because I know that teams have sort of picked on the Bengals linebackers when Burfict has been out. But I like Drone okay. It was disturbing that he only saw 70% of the 49er snaps last week, so that's something to monitor.
Yeah, I had him a couple GPPs that he quickly tanked there, but certainly a guy that's. I mean, someone's gonna have to catch the ball in the short passing game there. Next up, 50.5 total. Eagles and the Cardinals, and one of your favorites, of course, Carson Palmer. You're going to be hard pressed to find a better spot, and I feel like we've said that a lot here, but I mean, it really is a phenomenal spot for Carson Palmer once again.
Yeah, we have Carson Palmer, Cam Newton, and Tom Brady, all with just unbelievable matchups, and similarly priced. I know Palmer's a little below those guys on DraftKings and on FanDuel, but Palmer is the ultimate floor play. And the Eagles have been carved up via the air and the ground, but mostly the air over the past 4 or 5 weeks. Philly has allowed 19 or more fantasy points to quarterbacks in 5 of their past 6 games. And, Carson Palmer basically always scores 20 points. So he's just locked and loaded for another 20 points here. And for, it's kind of rare that we can say this, but I think that he has upside here. You just hope that the Eagles don't tank right in this one, because basically that limits Palmer's production probably.
Yeah, and I mean that's been the issue with them all year. So if they can score some points, and hopefully they can score enough to keep this one close, because we have seen, like you said, Palmer games where they get up a ton, doesn't need to do anything in the second half. But either way, I kind of cringed when I noticed that you mentioned the Michael Floyd game in here, because I was one of the seemingly everyone that was burned by that game. But Michael Floyd's going to be a guy that's a popular play, but one guy I'm not seeing talked about much is Larry Fitzgerald. So what's your take on Fitz as a contrarian option to Michael Floyd?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like people are all over Floyd and not really remembering that Fitzgerald is by far and away the most targeted and most used part of this passing offense. Fitzgerald has had a lot of success against the Eagles in recent years, and the Eagles have been particularly bad against slot receivers like Fitzgerald. So if you think that the Cardinals are going to approach that 27.25 implied total, you just have to believe that Fitzgerald is going to have a big part in that, and I like him a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on here to the Monday night game, highest total of the week, as you mentioned here. Saints, small favorites. Saints, terrible secondary. So Matt Stafford, the guy who early this season looked awful, under the Jim Bob Cooter offensive scheme, he's looked much better, much more comfortable. And really, I mean, he's done it kind of without Calvin Johnson over the past few weeks. He really hasn't seen a ton of looks. He hasn't really produced much. Part of that due to, a nagging ankle injury apparently, and the fact that Stafford just is still Matt Stafford. But this one does have the highest total, so you're going to want to have yourself some pieces of it. And I've been burned by Calvin Johnson every single one of his bad games, but I've been there for the good ones too, and I'm not going away from him this week.
Yeah, he basically the argument for Calvin this week is that he gets to go up against Brandon Browner, and who's worse than Brandon Browner? I don't. Every week it seems like they pan to him screaming at coaches and players on the sidelines because he's just allowed a 90-yard touchdown to somebody. So Calvin, and I think that this is a particularly appealing week to go with Calvin because he is going to be, I think, going to have somewhat squashed ownership because of the disaster last week. I think that he probably burned a lot of people last week, and but the matchup is awesome. And on Golden Tate, I mentioned his matchup is not as good this week. I wouldn't really chase him, and definitely I'm not playing him in cash. Eric Ebron is the other passing piece of the Lions offense that I want a part of. Brandon Pettigrew tore his ACL, which I know Pettigrew is not exactly fantasy relevant, but Ebron's snap percentages for the Lions has plummeted over the past 6 or 8 weeks, and they're going to have pretty much no choice but to have Ebron in there now, whether they like it or not. We all know that the Saints are very generous to opposing tight ends. They allow 6.3 receptions and 0.77 touchdowns, per game. So, I think that Ebron is actually he's a punt play in cash for me this week.
Yeah, I like that. And then on the New Orleans side, we saw last week, nobody really knew what the situation was going to be with the backfield. And then, of course, if you took the chance on Tim Hightower, you were thrilled. So what's your favorite pieces, aside from Drew Brees? Drew Brees is going to be a popular play. But you going with any of these Saints running backs here?
I guess, the Lions before last week were actually really good, have been really good against the run for about a month or more. So to say that, Hightower has another great matchup, I think is overstating it a little bit. Is he going to see, 28 carries last week?
Yeah. Highest of his career.
Yeah, so I think that to lock him in for 20 carries is dangerous. Last week just shaped up great for him because the Saints got out to a big lead. The Bucs were not doing much at all on offense, and so that they could just keep pounding the ball. I don't really see that happening here, and because I think that the Lions have the offensive weapons to really exploit the Saints defense. So Hightower for me, I don't know. I'm not very interested.
Yeah, I am not too thrilled about it myself either. I had to get your take on it before we got into it. So that'll wrap things up for us here. Thanks for hanging out with us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. He's at CD Carter 13, and check out all the rest of our content at dailyfantasycafe.com.